Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Tidbits. My name is Kristina Koopman. Thanks for joining me. Okay, no softball questions this week, folks. We're getting right into it with my new favorite introduction, deep philosophical questions that are impossible to answer. This seems to be the new trend of how I open an episode, so bear with me. Question number 1. Who owns art? Question number 2. Who makes final decisions about its care and display long after the artist is gone? Question number 3. Which is more important, assuring the longevity of a piece by limiting who sees it? Or 2, seeing it to its fullest potential now, but potentially not having it in the long term? These questions and more all become relevant when talking about art, but specifically art acquired through colonialism. This will be part of the subject of today's video. We're going to be talking about the Benin Bronzes, but it's important to note that the situation with these pieces is unfortunately not that unique. Thousands of items have been looted from Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Native American populations. The past decade has seen a monumental rise in museums in the West facing the less than legal pasts of their collections, and a reckoning is coming on how to deal with them. But for now, let's take a deeper look. Real quick before we jump in, a vocab term, and this is rather important. That is the definition of colonialism. The dictionary defines it as the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial control over another country, occupying it with settlers, and then exploiting it economically. This is an important practice to keep in mind as we discuss today's video. The following is a quote currently on display at the British Museum's website. Quote, "During the second half of the 19th century, the balance of power between West African kingdoms like Benin and the European nations they traded with shifted massively towards European control. In the late 19th century, industrialized European nations, accompanied by new military technologies, began to exert greater power across the African continent. This political and commercial movement developed into the territorial land grab known as the Scramble for Africa." End quote. European nations wanted access to natural resources, everything from lumber, raw diamonds, and ivory to spices, cloth, and art. The British Empire was a growing machine, and expansion was the only way to fuel the fires of its growth. A further fundamental context that needs to be recognized for fully understanding this period of West African history is the transatlantic slave trade. This vast traffic in humans supplied labor to the colonies and plantations in the Americas, including those of Britain, allowing for the exploitation of labor and consumption of resources. While by the late 19th century this trade had been largely abolished, its increasing scale and barbarity in the preceding centuries had led to a massive impact on West African societies. The Benin Bronzes are a group of more than 1,000 metal plaques and sculptures that decorated the royal palace of the Kingdom of Benin in what is now Nigeria. Collectively, the objects form the best examples of Benin art, created from the 13th century onwards by the Edo people. Notably, most are not actually made of bronze, but of brass. The various artifacts we call the Benin Bronzes include carved elephant tusks, ivory leopard statues, even wooden heads. The most famous items are 900 brass plaques, dating mainly from the 16th and 17th centuries, once nailed to pillars in Benin's royal palace. The Kingdom of Benin, which occupied parts of present-day Nigeria between the 14th and 19th centuries, was very rich in sculptures of diverse materials, such as iron, bronze, wood, ivory, and terracotta. The Oba, or ruler, had a palace in Benin, the site of production for the royal ancestral altars. It was also a backdrop for an elaborate court ceremonial life. The palace was a vast, sprawling agglomeration of buildings and courtyards. and was the setting for hundreds of rectangular brass plaques whose relief images portray the persons and events that animated the court. As a courtly art, their principal objective was to glorify the Oba, the divine king, and the history of his imperial power, or to honor the Ioba of Benin, the Queen Mother. The figures depicted in the bronzes were cast in relief, with details incised into the wax model. Artists working in bronze were organized into a type of guild under royal decree and lived in a special area of the palace, under the direct control of the Oba. The works made using lost wax casting required great specialization. Their quality was superior when the king was especially powerful, allowing him to employ a great number of specialists. These great Benin artisans refined that technique until they were able to cast plaques only an eighth of an inch thick, surpassing the art as practiced by Renaissance masters in Europe. The following is an excerpt from an article written by Alex Marshall of the New York Times in January 2020. On January 2, 1897, James Phillips, a British official, set out from the coast of Nigeria to visit the Oba, or ruler, of the Kingdom of Benin. News reports said that he took a handful of colleagues with him, and it's assumed he went to persuade the Oba to stop interrupting British trade. He had previously written to colonial administrators asking for permission to overthrow the Oba, but he was turned down. When Phillips was told the Oba couldn't see him because a religious festival was taking place, he went anyway. He didn't come back. For the Kingdom of Benin, the killing of Phillips and most of his party had huge repercussions. Within a month, Britain had sent 1,200 soldiers to take revenge. On February 18th, the British Army took Benin City in a violent raid. The news reports, including from the New York Times, were full of colonial jubilation, calling the event, quote, the Benin Expedition. None of the reports mentioned that the British forces also used the opportunity to loot the city of its artifacts. It is unclear how many Beninese people lost their lives during this raid, but the city was brought to its knees and stripped of anything that could be taken and sold. At least one British soldier was, quote, wandering round with a chisel and hammer, knocking off brass figures and collecting all sorts of rubbish as loot. A quote from Captain Herbert Sutherland Walker, a British officer, wrote in his diary. Present-day Benin City has been calling for the return of its artifacts for decades. But a key moment came in the 1970s when the organizers of a major festival of black art and culture in Lagos, Nigeria, asked the British Museum for one prized item, a 16th century ivory mask of a famous Oba's mother. They wanted to borrow the work to serve as the centerpiece of the 1977 event, but the British Museum said it was too fragile to travel. Nigeria's news media told a different story, reporting that the British government had asked for $3 million of insurance, a cost so high that it was seen as a slap in the face to Nigerian officials. If you look up the Benin Bronze listing on the British Museum's website, you'll see the following statement. Quote, the museum is committed to active engagement with Nigerian institutions concerning the Benin Bronzes, including pursuing and supporting new initiatives developed in collaboration with Nigerian partners and colleagues. This includes full participation in the Benin Dialogue Group and working towards the aim of facilitating a new permanent display of Benin works of art in Benin City, to include works from the British Museum's collections. End quote. You'll note, however, that nowhere does it say they will return ownership of the pieces back to the Kingdom of Benin or the Nigerian government. There is increasing international pressure on the British institution to repatriate the stolen items, but signs of little progress. Hi, me again. I wanted to chat about this a little more face-to-face. The primary argument against repatriation of artifacts is that of safekeeping. In extremely oversimplified terms, the argument goes something along the lines of, I won't return the items to you because you do not have the facilities or resources with which to keep it safe. We'll keep them for you for the item's well-being. Never mind the fact that West African countries were stripped of their literal population and economic resources by these colonizers. But who is to say what protections these items require? You have a nicer garage than me, but does that mean I can't have a nice car? What right is it of yours to tell me what I can and can't store in there, especially after you stole something out of my garage a while ago? It's obviously an extremely oversimplified example, but I just kind of wanted to get the gist of it across to folks. This is the argument that's been going on for a while, and it's coming to a head in the recent years, the last decade or so. Further, rare and fragile art objects are often kept in closed private storage to ensure their safekeeping. For example, the British Museum only displays about 100 of the 900 plus pieces that make up their Benin collection. What good does an item do for an institution or a population if no one can see it? If all we can do is read about it or see it in photos, isn't that the same thing as the item not existing at all? Is it better to let some people see it in its full glory now and risk its deterioration over time? Or do we keep it pristine and safe, but limited exposure and only allow a select few to witness its story? Who do we say gets to be the few that look at it? I told you there are no easy answers today, but I honestly think that's the lesson that history, specifically art history, has to teach us. Museums across the world are battling this question and more all the time. Western institutions specifically have only recently begun grappling with a colonialist past and what it means to be the gatekeepers of an entire history and culture that's not their own. It's a pretty heavy burden to bear, but one that I think needs to be shared.